Hello everyone, thank you for coming to watch my talk. My name is Christopher Beach. I'm a researcher at the University of Manchester in the UK, and I'm here to talk to you about the impact of shift working on the potential for self-powering via kinetic energy harvesting in wearable devices. So just a brief summary of what I'm going to talk to you about today. I'm just going to introduce the motivations for why we're interested in wearable kinetic energy harvesting, and particularly why we're interested in shift work patterns. Then I'm going to show you the model that I use to estimate the power output for an energy harvester. I'm going to show you the dataset, the accelerometry dataset from the UK Biobank that I use to generate these results. I'm going to show you how I selected participants from this dataset and some of the considerations I had to undertake to ensure I made a valid analysis. And then finally, I'm going to present you the harvested power outputs for participants who followed shift work patterns, as well as participants who followed two different types of shift work patterns, so that's day shifts and night shifts, against control participants who didn't follow shift work patterns. So just some brief motivations to talk you through first. We want our wearable devices to be energy autonomous. That is, they don't require battery recharging, because we know this is a significant barrier to adherence and can cause problems such as gaps in data when participants have to take the devices off, charge them up, wait till that's charged, and then put them back on. So we want to ensure devices can be fit and forget, so they're easier for everyone to use. To this end, I previously investigated using energy harvesting to power wearable devices and how much power we can get from this from a typical free living population. So this figure here is from a preprint that I've recently published in IEEE Tech Archive, where I looked at 67,000 participants in the UK Biobank and stratified their kind of energy harvesting potential by day of the week, age, and gender. So that's very interesting, but that's a large number of participants averaged together and is kind of a representative of the population as a whole. But factors such as socio-demographic items, such as their type of work, may affect the energy harvesting output. And we, as we said before, we need to ensure that these devices work for everyone. So if it doesn't work for someone who follows shift work patterns, then we have a problem. The device then isn't going to collect the data that we need. So that's why we're looking at shift work patterns here and how this affects energy harvesting output. Okay, so the energy harvesting model is based off a mass spring damper model that models these three parameters here, the spring, the proof mass, and the damping factor model the real world parameters of an energy harvester. And these effectively come together to form a second order low pass filter that can be modelled like this, using this equation at the top here, where we've got a steady state gain changed by the spring constant, the resonant frequency of the harvester, and a Q factor. And we can change these parameters to change the properties of the harvester. And this paper at the bottom talks in a lot more detail about that and how I chose these parameters to match someone who's worn an energy harvester on the wrist. But we need some data to feed into this model, and that's where the UK Biobank has come in. So this dataset is a very rich dataset, and they've collected a whole wealth of information from socio-demographic factors like MRIs, electronic health record, heart images, as well as physical activity monitoring. So this is the part of the study that I've used in this work, where participants were asked to wear a wristwatch for 7 days a week to record their physical activity. So that's a 3-axis accelerometer worn on the wrist. But the true value of this comes in that you can link this physical activity data to all the other factors collected in the UK Biobank, particularly things such as their socio-demographics and lifestyle factors and body size measurements. So we can then model all these things together and generate really interesting data. So this is the device participants are asked to wear. It's a small 3-axis accelerometer, as I said. It's waterproof, designed to be worn for 7 days of continuous wear without recharging. So even when they're in the shower, when they go to bed, this device was still recording. So we've got a 7-day continuous data set. So within that, there were a few challenges to work with this dataset. It's very large, it's very rich, as I said, but there are a few things that I found while working with it. And one of the main ones was that on 5 days of the week, so that's every day excluding the Tuesday and the Sunday, I was getting this large discontinuity in the data at 10 o'clock. So I had to dig down into the data to try and find out why this was, and had a look at the recording protocol. And it appears that this kind of differs a bit from what participants were told or how participants thought the study was going to run. So participants were posted an accelerometer and told to wear it as soon as they received it, and it would start recording the next day. However, that's not quite what the device did. So the device started recording at 10 o'clock on the day after they received it, rather than first thing in the morning. And it finished recording effectively on day 8. So it was 7 days of kind of continuous wear, but it wasn't 7 days kind of as in days of the week. So what happened was participants put it on say, a Monday, wore it until Sunday at the end of the week, and then thought, oh, the study's done, I'll take it off at the end of Sunday here. Where in reality, the device was actually still recording on day 8 until 10 o'clock that day. So that meant that you get a large discontinuity occurring at this point here, because you've got people not wearing the device for this day, and then it starts again for the next participant at 10 o'clock that day. But only a small number of participants started recording on a Tuesday, and no participants started the study on a Sunday. So that's why the effect didn't occur on a Tuesday or a Sunday. So to resolve this, what I did was for all participants was just removed the first day of wear. So that effectively means taking out day 1 and day 8. So for these two participants, I just removed these 2 days, and that removed that discontinuity I showed you in that previous graph. So then digging down into the analysis I did in this work. So I want to know whether shift work impacted the energy harvester output. So I looked at the biobank dataset and found that they asked participants, does your job involve shift work? And they asked them this, but they asked them it twice at 2 different times, and the definitions of what they meant by shift work varied slightly each time. So the answers were slightly different. And this is a kind of a common theme among the UK Biobank. So data was collected at the beginning of the study in a touchscreen survey, and there were various online follow-ups. And the participants that did these online follow-ups kind of differed each time. So 100,000 participants may have done the accelerometry study, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the 120,000 participants that answered this question about whether their job involved shift work were the same participants. So the overlap isn't kind of exact. So you're going to get considerably less participants than 120,000. And also, these questions, as I said, were asked at different times. So obviously they only had a limited physical number of accelerometers to give participants. So this study was running for a few years, and this question was asked at different times. So the overlap between when this question was asked and when the accelerometry data was collected don't necessarily cover each other, and don't mean that when they asked them, did their job involve shift work, that data might not actually be correct by the time they did the physical activity study. So I had to do quite a lot of exclusion to make sure I removed participants who answered this question too far before they did the actual physical activity study. So after doing some pre-screening of participants, which I talk in a lot of detail in the paper, I generated 2 cohorts of data. The first cohort includes just under 1,300 participants who I identified as valid shift working participants. And then from that, I generated a matched control data set on sex and age who did not follow shift work patterns. And I matched it on the participant numbers, as you can see here, because otherwise you end up with a massively larger control data set who didn't follow shift work patterns. And then within that, I generated a second cohort, cohort 2, which is a subset of cohort 1, and that includes participants who specified whether their shift work they followed a day shift pattern or a night shift pattern. And here you can see the data set is now considerably smaller. I've got 51 participants in each group. And again, these were all matched on age and sex. So that's how come these numbers are all so similar, because I intentionally randomly select participants to kind of match the age and sex. So the first result from this paper, I've got this continuous line plot here that shows the difference in average power for the 2 groups. So cohort 1, where we've got a control group and a group that work shifts. And we can see they followed the same general pattern, but there's some differences, such as kind of around 10 o'clock and 1 o'clock, you can see the shift working group has large peaks in it above kind of the baseline that seems to roughly correspond with kind of shift change over times. And the control group has a large kind of noisy period here around 5 o'clock, which seems to roughly correspond with commuting times. So we're starting to see, even when we've averaged all these participants together, there are some differences in the way the groups behave and where we can expect there to be large peaks of power. But to provide a bit more insight into the spread of data values, I performed this analysis here. And what this is a rain cloud plot here, and what this shows is the location of the 10-minute window across a 24-hour period that contains the largest amount of power generated. So where in the day, effectively, was their most energy dense period? Effectively, when in the day were they most active? And now we can start to see some quite different trends in that the control group has kind of two distinct groups. So you've got a large number of participants grouped here around kind of 8 o'clock, and then you've got a number of participants grouped here in the evening around kind of between 6 to 8 o'clock in the evening. Whereas the shift working group, their most active period is spread much more largely across the kind of the working hours of the day. And you can see this effect is a lot less profound kind of on the Saturday and the Sunday. Digging down into cohort 2, because this cohort was much smaller, it wasn't possible to create a meaningful kind of continuous line plot as I showed you earlier. So instead, I compared the kind of average power generated by each of these three groups during what I call waking hours. So that's between 7 a.m. and 8 p.m. And you can see these the average kind of goes down a little bit. The average is fairly similar between all three groups, but the spread is quite a bit smaller in the nighttime shift workers, so they're much more kind of concentrated within this kind of around 100 microwatts compared to the control group, who have a much bigger spread of values. And again, digging down into that a bit more, we can now look at where the location of the most energy dense period was for the day shift workers, night shift workers, and a control group. And here you can really start to see some differences. So of note in particular is that the night shift workers have their most energy dense period spread across a much larger window than the day shift workers. So if you look in particular on Saturday, you can see the day shift workers here are really kind of concentrated between 8 o'clock in the morning and sort of around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, whereas those that follow night shift patterns are just spread kind of everywhere across the whole 24-hour period. So it's much harder to predict for people that follow night shift patterns where they're going to be most active and where you're going to generate the most harvested energy from. So that brings me to the end of the data I presented in this talk. There's more kind of information in the paper, but just to quickly summarise, shift workers overall have similar patterns to the control participants, but the shift type does have an impact on the location of the most power intense period. So if we want to do something like that's energy intensive on our wearable device, like transmitting a large amount of data, we want to correlate this with when the most power is going to be available from the energy harvester. But for shift working participants, this could be kind of anywhere within the day. And we found that people that follow night shift participants are kind of the least predictable out of everyone. This value could be spread anywhere within the 24-hour period. So that ends my talk. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, my contact details are at the bottom of this slide. Please send me an email, and thank you very much for listening. Bye.